Now, hello, I am Robert Ogilvy, executive strategist and EQ coach. Glad you guys could join me today. So, what are we dealing with today? So, you heard me mention the term mastery in the last video. It was one of three components of motivation. But learning and development is it's not just to some degree relevant to everyone, but it's particularly relevant to highly qualified professionals that need to become really excellent in their field or need to deal with very highly technical or like high dynamic strategy issues, which is of course why I'm interested in this in terms of someone who works with managers and executives, right? Stuff is really important. But there's also a lot, frankly, a lot of bad ideas, a lot of floofy ideas about mastery, about learning, which are getting in the way or don't always serve us, or they create unnecessary barriers, right? Some particularly, well, I'll get into exactly what they are, but there's lots of myths out there, and so basically this video is about doing a bit of myth busting, and the whole intent of all of it is to empower you guys so that you can learn and develop not just your great skills, but you can be happier in terms of the kind of work you do. So I'll just tell you up front what the three things are. We're gonna debunk this myth about the 10,000 hours of practice, which you've heard from the Malcolm Gladwell book Outliers. We're gonna go through exactly why not all learning is credentialed or formal, and actually the great opportunities that really offers. And then lastly, actually, we're going to go through, is it possible to be smart in some areas, but ultimately not masterful, and what the answer to that is. And as you can guess, the answer is yes, right? You can have high IQ and still, I mean, we could say we could say low EQ, yes, but also just very unapplied. And we'll get into more what that looks like and the ways that can personally and professionally kind of derail things. Okay, first one, 10,000 hours of practice. Do you need that much to be an outlier? Let's first try to break down why Malcolm Gladwell kind of says this, right? Okay, so you've heard me mention that in the early to mid levels of becoming better at something, more experience at that thing does boost your performance, but then that starts to taper off. You stop getting the boosts, right? And then reflexivity kicks in, or more so kicks in. So the point Malcolm Gladwell is making in the book isn't just that you need 10,000 hours of practice to do this, but he's also citing these kind of case study examples of people that very early would have gotten a whole bunch of practice at something. I think one of them is Bill Gates, and somehow he has access to a computer in the early mid 60s when he's like 10 years old, right? So by the time he's like a 19-year-old Stanford grad, it's like, what? You've been working with computers for like 10 years, right? And like, who else in his peer group would have anything close to that experience, right? A handful of people, right? And so he gets early contact, that sets him ahead, right? And you could say the same thing about any domain. We could be talking about sports, we could be talking about mathematics, we could be talking about music, we could be talking about really any kind of technical or engineering domain, or what have you, right? So I don't think it's mind-blowing to think that the more experience you have at something, the better. But what I want to underscore about this is that not all experience is equal, but secondly, the rationale of like, why do you need to do this, right? And if you're simply picking some anorak goal of some hobby you do, or even some academic subject that you're interested in, that you're good at, that you just want to get 10,000 hours of practice at, that's actually a really bad reason, right? You want clear applied things which help you get feedback, and this relates more to the notion of OODA loops, right? You observe, orient, decide, act. You want your learning to be cyclical. You want there to be tight feedback loops so you can know how well you're performing, right? And that actually helps you. First of all, because there's something that you can kind of get feedback from, it helps you improve your performance faster. But second of all, the more you can deal with any kind of useful application, all the better, right? Actually, one of the things that's kind of grinding about a lot of schoolwork is because it's so much of it is intentionally known to be disposable. The more that you want to do cool applications with your knowledge and technical skill and your mastery, the more it's like, oh no, this is junk throwaway work, right? That doesn't really get a lot of people's goat. But that's also long-term bad. Again, one of the three motivation elements in terms of you doing this long-term, right? So even if the mental model is there that you could understand something well, you need to think, what's going to help me at this point, right? So again, I'm just going to remind you that on the mid to far end of it, reflexivity, how developed your mental models are, and how tightly you can get not only feedback, but just kind of cogitate your way through a problem, all the better. But the more you have a clear use case, the faster you're going to learn. Some people which are excellent at laying this out is that I know Tim Ferriss has a lot of stuff where he's trying to deal with different hacks and tips. I generally don't like that, in that I should say it's a good approach for a generalist, but it sometimes long term can mean at some point you need to put aside a kind of more simplistic mental model for something more robust and advanced, right? But like, I remember one, and maybe this is a show he was doing or something, where he had to learn BJJ in like a week, and I don't think he'd ever done it before. He was in good physical shape, but he'd never done it, and then in a week he needs to get to learn to do this, right? So obviously he's not going to become a master in 7 days, but he learned enough of what he needed to do about takedowns and what are the most successful opportunities that he could get good at that, right? This is actually something critical that managers and executives need to learn because it relates to, so part of when we say that they are generalists is saying that they need to perform in a bunch of different functional areas. And so the degree to which you specialize in one is the degree to which you don't train in another thing. They have to manage learning, mastering a whole bunch of things. And so the question is kind of like, how good is their mental model at that? Okay, there's a whole lot more we could go into about kind of specialists versus generalists and how good are the mental models here and are you motivated about it. But suffice to say, this whole 10,000 hours of practice thing is useless, and have a good use case, have a good application, because that's going to actually really help you learn faster. Second point, not all learning is credentialed or formal, right? Now, on some level, it's good that there is some kind of credentialing process. Now, there's an economics principle, I think it's called law of lowest common averages, that the workable kind of trade value, perceived value of something will gravitate towards the lowest perceived value that's acceptable for that. So if you use kind of academic GPA terms, right, you know, the 2.0, the 3.0, and the 4.3 student all graduate with their degree, right? There is a performance difference between those, but because they all get their degree, that's, you know, it gravitates towards the value, you know, as if it's the 2.0, right? Which is another reason that drives us to, if you can do more, if you can learn and master and get more credentials, you might want to do that to differentiate. But the real things that will actually capture a lot of that knowledge and learning is informal, which is to say, it's things you pick up and you can't quite describe, which is again why professional designations place so much emphasis on having enough, like often 3,000 to 5,000 hours of experience, because there's so many little things which add up to how masterful you are at that area or not. But the other part is very much the peer group, right? The informal networks, the professional networks, the colleague networks, but who you interface with, and that's useful for a few reasons. First of all, you learn more if there's matched difficulty. So if you think of two peers doing a sport together, collaborating or competing, you learn more if someone's at matched skill level, right? If they're really inordinate, that's dysfunctional to both, because a lower person doesn't have enough mental models or capacity to know what to do, and the more advanced person is really not being appropriately challenged, right? So both of their learning is suboptimal, right? You want match learning. But it's also to say that if you're around some peer group, some professional group, you can pick up a lot from them real fast, right? And that's part of the fluency of how you develop a professional domain. Not just you have working mental models, but like a kind of lingua franca, which helps you like reasonably understand what's going on and work with that ever more swiftly and precisely, right? Informal networks are also critical for organizational design and development, because it's tapping into the existing goodwill and expertise that's there, and then it's often, if you're doing it well, it's trying to capture that in some more formal, structured way. But it would be way easier, more feasible to kind of instantiate some new team or department if you found people in the organization that were already into it and already even had some connection or had done bits of that, and then you kind of formalize it into group, as opposed to saying, hey, we're starting this new department, you people that seem to, may or may not have the background, that obviously don't know each other, go start that new thing, right? That would actually be very much an uphill battle, right? I would also personally say, I ask smart people or people that I would say have domain in a certain area for their advice all the time, and that way it's even ingratiating. It's a good relationship building tool, right? So figure out what someone is into, and then it's like, how does that work? How can I learn more about that? Or what's your favorite opinion on this, right? Get someone's expert opinion on something. That's a fantastic way to learn, right? Who is actually probably the people that we learn most from? Well, actually, in our young life, a lot of our conscientiousness comes from, and this is particularly true for females, from our mothers, right? So there are tons of ways, in the family unit, in society, that we capture informal knowledge, and that's, it's not codified in some credential, but it's actually really important to our learning and development, or lack thereof, right? Maybe we don't get it. I wish we had a lot more time, but I'm coming close to the 10-minute mark, so let me just quickly recap. We didn't get to the third point. You don't need 10,000 hours of practice. You just need a good application and mental model. And not all learning is formal or credentialed, right? They're informal. There's a lot of amazing stuff going on. I'm Robert Ogilvie, Executive EQ Coach. I'll talk to you guys soon.